Jack had spent most of his life in the wild, far away from the hustle and bustle of town. He was a cowboy, one of the last few left in the rugged open land of the West. He had a small cabin, a few cattle, and his horse, which was all he ever needed. There wasn't much in the world that could shake him, but that all changed on one cold afternoon. He was riding through the canyon, his horse's hooves crunching the dry earth beneath them. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the desert. Jack was on his way back home after a long day of checking the cattle, but something caught his ear. It was a faint cry, almost like the wind, but there was something in it that made him stop. His heart raced. It was a voice. Someone needed help. He urged his horse forward, riding deeper into the canyon where the rocks loomed tall and the land grew more desolate. The sound grew louder, but it wasn't until he rounded a bend that he saw her. A woman lying on the ground, her body covered in dust and bruises. Her clothes were torn and her face was battered. Jack dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. He knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he checked for signs of life. She was breathing, but just barely. He could see that she had been through something terrible. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they locked with his. She gasped, looking around in confusion, trying to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, gently urging her to stay still. "Take it easy, ma'am," he said softly. "You're safe now." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with fear and mistrust. She didn't speak, but Jack could see the struggle inside her. Her chest rose and fell quickly as she tried to catch her breath. She was terrified, but not of him. No, it was something else, something that had happened before he had found her. Jack had never been the type to ignore someone in need, but he knew helping her could bring trouble. The last thing he wanted was to get caught up in someone else's fight. But the woman, her eyes pleading with him, made him forget his doubts. She was in danger, and Jack had never been one to leave a person behind. He carefully lifted her into his arms, holding her close as he carried her back to his cabin. It wasn't far, but with her injuries, he couldn't risk her walking on her own. She was light, almost fragile, and Jack had to remind himself not to move too fast, not to hurt her further. As he reached his cabin, he laid her gently on the bed, pulling the blankets over her. He started a fire in the small stove, the crackling flames providing warmth against the chill that hung in the air. Jack worked quickly, gathering what little medical supplies he had. He wasn't a doctor, but he had learned enough over the years to treat cuts and bruises, and he did his best to clean the woman's wounds. The woman didn't speak, only watching him with wary eyes. Jack could tell she wasn't used to being helped. Maybe she had been on the run, or maybe she had never trusted anyone in her life. Jack didn't know, but something told him this woman was more than just a victim of bad luck. Her eyes were filled with pain, but there was something else behind them. A fire, a strength that hadn't been extinguished yet. Jack wondered what kind of person she was before the world had beaten her down so cruelly. Once her wounds were cleaned, Jack sat beside her, keeping watch over her. He didn't ask questions. He simply let her rest, letting the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the cabin soothe her. The hours passed and the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the night cold and still. Jack didn't sleep.
He couldn't. He kept his eyes on the woman who was now drifting into a deep sleep.
There was a part of him that wanted to know more about her, but he resisted the urge to pry. She would tell him when she was ready. The cabin was silent except for the crackling of the fire. Jack's mind kept racing. Who was this woman? What had happened to her? And why had she been out in the canyon all alone, looking so lost and broken? The night dragged on, and Jack found himself dozing off in the chair beside the bed. His eyes closed, but just as he was drifting into sleep, he felt something. A sudden weight on his chest, and before he could react, he opened his eyes to find the woman lying on top of him. His heart raced in a panic. What was going on? How had she gotten there? He pushed her off quickly, his hands instinctively grabbing her shoulders to move her aside. The woman sat up abruptly, her eyes wide with shock, her hands trembling. She stammered an apology, looking flustered. I didn't mean to," she said, her voice soft, barely a whisper. Jack didn't know what to say. He was still in shock, trying to piece together what had just happened. His mind raced with questions, but no answers came. The woman's face flushed with embarrassment, and she quickly scrambled to sit up, adjusting her torn clothing as she did. "I'm sorry," she repeated, not looking at him. I was having a dream. I didn't mean. Jack's heart softened. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She was still disoriented from whatever had happened to her. Her body was still weak, and Jack could see that the strange position they were in had been nothing more than a result of a confused mind, not anything malicious. He sighed deeply, trying to steady his racing heart. "It's all right," he said, his voice gentle. "You're safe here. No harm done." But even as the words left his mouth, Jack couldn't help but wonder what had truly happened. Was it just a strange accident, or was there something more to the situation? Jack's mind couldn't help but drift toward the idea that there was more to this woman than met the eye. He would find out in time, he was sure of that. For now, though, Jack had to focus on getting her better. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew he couldn't just leave her now. She was part of his life, whether he understood it or not. The days passed slowly after the strange incident, and Jack kept a close eye on Aylin. He was careful, respectful, and gave her the space she needed. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about her. As she recovered, she started to open up little by little, sharing bits and pieces of her life. Aylin had been born into a small Native American tribe, far from the main settlements where life was simple but difficult. She'd always known that her people were at risk of losing their way of life, but she never thought it would happen so quickly. Her tribe had been attacked, homes destroyed, families torn apart. She was one of the few survivors, and what was left of her people had scattered into the wilderness, trying to find safety wherever they could. She spoke of her home with a distant, haunted look in her eyes. "It was peaceful," she said softly, staring into the fire. "Until it wasn't. Until the soldiers came." Jack had no words to offer. He wasn't one for grand speeches, and he knew that sometimes silence was the best thing. He just sat with her, letting her speak if she wanted to and giving her the comfort of his quiet presence. As the days went by, Aylin began to regain her strength. She wasn't as weak as when Jack had first found her. Though her body still bore the marks of what she'd endured, she still had nightmares at night, tossing and turning in the bed, her face filled with fear. Jack could hear her whispering in her sleep, sometimes in a language he didn't understand. But when she woke up, she always apologized as if she had done something wrong. Jack didn't know how to help her with that. He wasn't a healer. He was just a cowboy, a man who had spent most of his life alone, far from the troubles of the world. But he was learning that sometimes just being there for someone was the best thing you could do. One evening, after the sun had set and the stars had started to fill the sky, Jack went out to check the cattle. He had been thinking about Aylin, about how she had come into his life like a storm, bringing with her a story that wasn't his to tell, but felt somehow connected to him. He couldn't help but wonder if there was a reason he had found her in that canyon. Maybe it wasn't just chance. When he returned to the cabin, Aylin was sitting outside looking out at the vast desert. She didn't turn when he approached, but he could tell she was waiting for him. "I think I owe you an apology," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For what happened earlier?" Jack shook his head, stepping closer. "There's nothing to apologize for. It was just a misunderstanding. No harm done." But Aylin didn't seem convinced. She turned her head to face him, her eyes searching his as if she were looking for something, trying to make sense of what had happened. I don't know what's happening to me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, but I feel like something has changed since I came here. Like we're connected somehow." Jack paused. He hadn't expected her to say that, but in a way it made sense. There had been a connection between them since the moment he found her in the canyon, and though he hadn't fully understood it, he felt it too. Something unspoken, something deeper than just a chance encounter. "I don't know what it is either," Jack admitted, his voice soft. "But I don't think it's something bad. We'll figure it out, Aylin." Aylin smiled faintly, but there was still uncertainty in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." Jack nodded, sitting down beside her. They sat in silence for a while, just watching the stars. Jack wasn't sure where this would lead, but he knew he couldn't turn back. He couldn't abandon her. She was part of his life now, whether by fate or chance, and that was something he couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, they continued to grow closer. Aylin began helping with small tasks around the cabin, making herself useful while she recovered. Jack showed her how to care for the cattle and fix things around the place. In return, she shared more about her culture, her people, and the traditions that had been passed down to her. Jack found himself captivated by the stories, the wisdom in her words and the quiet strength that radiated from her. But the more time they spent together, the more Jack noticed something he couldn't ignore. Aylin was different. Her eyes held a depth of experience that spoke of more than just the life she had led. It was as if there were layers to her that Jack couldn't understand, like she was a part of something much bigger than either of them. One night, as they sat by the fire, Aylin seemed distant, lost in thought. Jack watched her carefully, wondering what she was thinking. He had noticed that she would sometimes drift into silence, staring off into the distance as if lost in some memory or thought. Tonight was no different. "What is it, Aylin?" he asked, breaking the silence. She looked at him, her eyes soft but filled with something Jack couldn't quite read. "I don't belong here," she said quietly. "I don't belong in this world anymore. I feel like I'm drifting, like I'm waiting for something." Jack frowned, not sure how to respond. He could feel the weight of her words, the sadness in her tone. "You belong here as much as anyone," he said firmly. "No one is ever truly alone, even when they feel like it. You're not alone, Aylin." She didn't respond right away, but Jack could see that his words had struck something inside her. She looked down at her hands, lost in thought, and Jack knew she was fighting with something deep inside. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel it. The tension, the pull between them that neither of them fully understood. The night stretched on, and as the fire flickered and the stars shimmered above them, Jack realized that he didn't have all the answers. But he did know one thing. Whatever Aylin was going through, he would be there to help her through it. They didn't need to have all the answers now. They just needed each other. And as he looked at her, he knew that they were more than just two people thrown together by chance. They were connected, and that connection would lead them to something neither of them could predict. Jack didn't know where it would take them, but he was ready to face whatever came next. As long as Aylin was by his side, they sat there together, the quiet of the night surrounding them, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay.